a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Australia's best independent news and opinion radio show, The Daily Australian, with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne.
It's kind of like when you're getting ready for a takeoff on the aeroplane. I know, Nicola, that you haven't done that for a while, but that feeling before they do that big fast takeoff down the runway and up in the air, that is our opening there for you. So welcome, everyone, to the Daily Australian for Thursday, July the 3rd. It is episode 125. That sounds impressive just saying that out loud. I am Jason Olbourne, one half of the show, and as you can see there is Nicola Charles. Welcome back and a happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, everyone. I'm going to try not to get too fired up today, but some of the news today is a bit of a mixed bag. We're not exactly finding justice where we thought we would find it, Jason. So we'll see how it goes. I've not had a coffee before the show, so we'll see if we can remain calm.
Well, that will be interesting, isn't it? And it is nice, though, to get fired up about certain things. And it's not just us getting fired up. I've noticed that the mainstream the news are getting fired up about a certain subject, as are the politicians. It's really, really, really something else to behold when you watch it happen in real time. So just to sort of recap, we're talking about the childcare story that has just really captured the imagination now for all the wrong reasons. And what it's doing is it's highlighting some very significant problems. And one would hope that what's going to happen now is it's going to maybe interrupt the plans of people who want to cover this stuff up for reasons that we don't necessarily know, but we can certainly suspect. So Carl Stefanovic on the Today Show is really fired up about this particular subject, as is his sister-in-law, Sylvia Jeffries, who is married to Carl's brother, Peter Stefanovic, who broke down in tears yesterday talking about this particular subject. And then, of course, you've got the Federal Education Minister, Jason Clare, coming out, and on multiple interviews now, he's being introduced as somebody who has a friend who was affected by this particular childcare incident of this Joshua Brown. Now, what I don't understand is that how is a man who's meant to represent the entire population of Australia as its education minister coming out and making out that it's all about him and his friend and not about the 1,200 individuals that now have to have certain testing done of children under the age of 3, for goodness sake. How is it about Jason Clare? But if it is about Jason Clare, and if it is about Carl Stefanovic, and if it is about Sylvia Jeffries, then you can bet that they have now crossed a line where they realise that there are real people suffering in ways that they may have brushed under the carpet for years, pretending that it was a conspiracy theory or it was the cookers just making this thing up, and now we know that it's certainly not. So big changes are certainly coming, and at long last there is a real debate taking place. Carl and this particular lady, Louise Edmonds, got on there and made some big claims, such as banning men from childcare centres, something that we talked a little bit about yesterday. So whilst I'm reflecting upon it and wondering where it goes, it is the debate that we have longed for. So I'm delighted that it's happening, even though it's happening based on the wrong reasons. But it means now that people's opinions are expected, and you can't just come out and go, oh, well, we did an inquiry a little while ago. There were all these recommendations. We didn't do it, so we've got to stop sitting on our hands, which is what Jason Clare, the education minister, is actually saying. And we're like, well, if you didn't put it into place before, then there's a reason why you're not, and we want to get to the bottom of what is going on there as well. But at the same time, we want to talk about ways that we're going to protect kids. And the ultimate way that you would do that at this point is pull them out. And this is what blew my mind this morning, watching this interview and these reportings going on. The reporter from Channel 9 was standing outside of this particular kindergarten, and it was dark, so it was like early morning. And there you could see in the background was a parent holding the hand of a child in silhouette form, walking up to the front door of this kindergarten to take the child to kindy for the day. And I thought that would be the last thing that I would be doing right now. I would be running a mile from this particular kindergarten, waiting for all sorts of assurances from them before I would send my children back there. But people are still oblivious and still want to trust the system, even though this massive breach of trust has taken place, Nicola. That was a step too far for me. I still can't believe that people are somewhat in denial, but also still want to trust.
I do find it interesting that people really sit up and take notice when there's an individual that's a predator that's potentially harmed children. And, you know, we've spoken now for years about the harm that has befallen children via government mandates and big pharma. But because that's faceless, because that's corporate or political, they don't realize that there are actually human beings behind that harm that's been perpetrated on children too. And that's the kind of physical harm that can also last a lifetime. So it's interesting, the human psyche, that when this, one individual comes along, and believe me, I know from experience, they're everywhere. They're in your street. They could be your next door neighbor. Near me, there is a teacher that's been pulled out of a primary school I've mentioned before because he was sharing pornographic images of children the same age as the primary school children he was teaching. So he was looking at them in a sexual way. And I spoke about how that can't be fixed in the brain no matter what you do. And so it's interesting, isn't it? Once we've got a hero, people cling on to the hero. And we've got, a demon, they cling on to the demon. It's this individual. There are people on our planet, people in leadership positions who've done far more harm than this individual, let's say. And you're right, Jason, they always seem to bring it back to their personal experience. But when we bring things back to our personal experience, they don't want to listen. But it's different when it's them.
Isn't it? And so they'll say, oh, that's just anecdotal evidence. So it doesn't meet the credential to be considered to be a fact that is worthy of investigation to therefore create change. Now, we talk about, mainstream here on this show, and I know that, people have different positions about everything. One of our mission statements at the Daily Australian is to be able to create a product that suits those who support independent media, who are the lifeblood of what we do, realizing that to create massive change by shifting narratives is that we have to appeal always to a new audience, and that new audience is the mainstream, who I believe is our competitor in what we're doing here. It's not the other independent news people who have developed their own styles and products and different ways of doing things. But the greenfield and the investment opportunity, if you will, for want of a better term, to make this a going concern and a success story is to appeal to people that are now scratching their heads and realizing that trust has been breached, and there is a system out there that is calling them out in real time that is fact-based. So having said that, I always refer to, mainstream media sources, not for everything, but just to show you where the zeitgeist is, where we are, the spirit of the age at a given moment. So I'll often quote from, Murdoch papers, and I'll often quote from Guardian papers because they represent, different ends of the spectrum. So getting back to all of that, I find it interesting, and we've talked about this many times, but how is it that on the Murdoch newspapers, they'll do a story buried down there, but still on that front page as you go down, and there's always an OnlyFans story. It's always something about a star, and they make them out to be stars, and they're porn stars, using, a social media site, OnlyFans, to peddle their wares. But there was a story again today about a school teacher, a female school teacher in her 30s, that was discovered by her students, taken it to school, spread it around, and next thing the school teacher is sacked. And they don't make out that it's a story of, feeling sorry for the school teacher who got found out, but it's the real story is the fact that you've got a school teacher in a position of trust that wants to earn extra money by doing, literally selling her wares on an OnlyFans site. And I can't understand where you think that is a reasonable thing to do even in a world today that is highly permissive, and this permissive culture. But surely to goodness, they tell you when you start at school that you have a position of authority, a position of power, and there are certain lines you don't cross. It's like a psychologist can't have an affair with a client. It's just a no-no. It's a taboo. And if you do, you lose your license or you pay a higher penalty, including, anything, disciplinary action, maybe fines, maybe prison, all sorts of things. But where does a school teacher get off thinking that they can have an OnlyFans account and turn up at school tomorrow? How does that work?
I don't see a teacher as having a position of authority. I see a teacher having a position of responsibility. And that was very irresponsible. And it's the same across the board with our bureaucrats and our health professionals. They had positions of responsibility, and a lot more weight really is on responsibility than authority. Right? Authority, I always think, is, the cop pulls you over and breath tests you, and they have a certain authority to do that, right? There are certain things that, I mean, not really actually, if you look at the letter of the law, but we won't go into that. That's a different show. That's probably a podcast. But it's responsibility, isn't it? Right? And you would hope that teachers are, and I also think that there is an elastic band reflex that happens in the mainstream media. So yesterday, you rightly said that's your instinct as a dad. I'd be a lot more comfortable if the childcare worker wasn't male. It was a young male, and he had tattoos on his fingers and all the things that you thought were, felt were red flags, and they may be. I'm not saying they're not. And so the mainstream media in their elastic band panic because they know that people are actually going to say males shouldn't work. This mainstream media person said males shouldn't work in childcare. And one of our listeners actually messaged me on email yesterday and said, I work in childcare and I'm telling you, why do young males want to work with babies and change nappies? She said, I've always found it highly suspicious. She also told me that she's currently working in one of these childcare settings, and that you were right, that they had all these glass walls and no one could be in the bathroom. That's all changed. They don't have the glass walls anymore. And she said they also changed that they all keep their mobile phones on them in case there's an emergency, right? In case something happens. So it was quite interesting. This person was very, very concerned. And so the mainstream media, I think, know that we come, baying for blood and seeking justice, just like we did through the pandemic and still are, and still don't have it. And so they're very worried that all of these guys will suddenly be out of a job. But the problem, that may be the case, or people will pull their kids out of childcare. The problem is you need psychological checks these days to do certain jobs. I mean, I in 2015, when I was not acting, I went back on Neighbours in 2013 and 2016. And in the middle, I thought I can't do nothing. And I went to work for a very famous German car brand. And to get this job, I had to go through a psychological assessment, Jason. And the psychological assessment was 20 pages long. And it said that I had, I scored quite highly in emotional intelligence and scored quite highly in regular intelligence. But more than that, it showed that I would be an extremely loyal person, loyal to the brand. Not sure how accurate that one was, to be honest. I learned a few things about that brand. But they don't... It's just like getting a working with children's check, right? So to get a working with children's check, which my husband has actually, because he used to do lots of charity work for the Good Friday Appeal, because his child was in hospital once and he was very grateful. So he always gave of his time, and it usually fell on his birthday, but it didn't matter. He would help park cars. He would give out balloons to kids. He'd do whatever they wanted him to do to raise money. Of course, he realizes now he should not have been on the side of Big Pharma at all. But he had to get this working with children's check, which basically it's like a police check, isn't it? Where they make sure you haven't got any convictions. Well, Correct. The responsibility of working with children as a teacher and as a childcare person isn't just about whether you've got a criminal record. This is about psychological profile of you. Now, we know for a fact they know how to psychologically profile us. A Facebook account is a psychological profile of you. This is why the CIA engineered Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg, right? So they know what you've posted, what you've said, when you've done it. And I said yesterday, it would be very unfair for a child of 15 who makes a mistake and says something out of turn to not get a job when he's 30, because they say, well, when you were 15, when you were supposed to be making all your mistakes, you said something racist. Where's the digital footprint on these people that we're entrusting with 5-month-old babies? Right? That's the kind of position where you may have to say, sure, do your due diligence. Where was the due diligence? They have to do that for, what are they called? Stewards on airlines, right? So you don't go nuts and open the plane door at 35,000 feet. Why don't we have psychological tests and these kind of checks on people holding the most precious thing a human being ever has, their child?
Perfectly put. When you consider in a hospital setting, if a patient requires like morphine or a drug like that, it's called a Schedule 8 drug, and you need to have two practitioners that walk into a room. So one hands it out, one marks it, and it's a self-checking responsibility.
An audit,
and it happens in real time. Now, Schedule 8 drugs do go missing often, but they are an immediate alert, and an alarm literally, would go off one way or another, but people still get away with it. So there's always a way to get away with it. But having said that, are they going to need, and they probably already do, have a situation where if you have people changing nappies in the under 2 room, if you're going to have 2 people working at the time doing this, checking, I can't believe that would be the case, but it would make sense that would be the case. Now, the other thing is the mobile phone excuse. If there's an emergency, that kind of is an excuse, because why wouldn't you have a CB radio, for example, that would be on around it, and they train, they go, okay, we have an emergency up in sector 3, which everyone knows is up the back where the whatever is, and people come running and someone calls an ambulance, and it's all done in that time. It's not like
or a baby monitor.
Yes, exactly. But it's not like a kindy has one staff. I mean, it's the most densely staffed situation that there is. Now, of course, it's the exception to the rule that we have this particular Brown character, but it's not an isolated incident anymore. So this is why it flares up. But the magnitude of what had happened, the fact that we are talking about 1,200 children. Now, the other thing is, just because you work in the under 2 room, what I don't understand is why wouldn't you be working in the 2 to 3s and and perhaps the 3 to 5s or 4 to 5s, the ones that before they go back to school. Now, when my youngest son was going through, we were going to send him to school. He turned 5 in February, so he hadn't quite turned 5 when school started, but the next week or so. And we took him in, and he just wasn't ready. So we decided to keep him out and start him a year later when he was almost 6, which meant that he would, and a completely different kid, and this is a common thing. So there are 5-year-olds that are almost overcooked at that stage and ready for school around about mid-year, which he was, but they sit it out and they just do another 6 months, and by the time school starts, they're ready. So you are dealing, again, what I'm saying is that these characters, a 5-year-old that's toilet trained is a very different entity to an under 2 that's there, that's literally because mum's forced to go to work. So wouldn't you think that rather than banning the men in the first instance, you might put a ban on the nappy changing room? Maybe the men can concentrate in areas dealing with the 5-year-old kids. They're at least they can speak. That was the other thing that came up. An under 2 generally isn't able to speak properly yet, or speak at all. So you've got a different problem. So how can they possibly report what's going on? But then you go the other way and you think, are they going to try and justify using sex education to very young people so that they can report an abuse? That doesn't make sense to me, because
what do you mean? I'm confused.
Well, so there's an argument, in certain areas that they want to, lower the age of consent. They want to introduce sex education. We've seen it from the WHO to 5-year-olds. They're mentioning that they want to introduce this into schools. But
well,
you can't.
Disgusting.
I agree with you, and my argument has always been a rock solid: let kids be kids. That's the purpose of what's going on here. At the very least, maybe you deal with it in high school, in if PE, physical education, becomes sex education, and there's a teacher teaching at that age. But then people will argue, but hang on, there are kids at 12 having sex, so they're already informed. But that's
But
again
we're
not
all
the
at
point.
different levels. We mature at different levels. We're certainly not mature at 5, that's for sure.
Exactly, and not every kid is having sex at 12 years of age. This is a smaller group, but it occurs. That's what I'm saying. You do hear about it in high schools, and you hear about it sometimes in primary schools, and people will be able to argue in their own right today. But it never justifies the fact that you are going to lower the age of consent and prepare people. It's not the point. The onus of responsibility is on the educators. It is on the system itself, the directors of the kindergartens, the daycare center, childcare centres, and of course with the educators themselves, to know that there is just a point where you just do not cross that line. And how anyone can think that the justification, again, for convenience, we need the phone for convenience, that's why we're giving the phones back to the staff, is not an excuse at all. There are other ways to communicate in those circumstances. So I do find that they are very, very lazy in what they're saying in that story.
In my experience, the best childcare experts, remember when we used to say that? Childcare expert. You had to be an expert in childcare to go into it. And there was endless courses, and, it was like getting a degree in childcare. People don't have that. You can see that most of the people that work in these places are very young now, and this isn't anything against the young. For my money, you would be in an apprentice stage like you are as an electrician and a plumber, right? Because otherwise you're going to screw up and someone's going to get flooded or electrocuted. So you're an apprentice until you've learnt the job, right? That's what an apprentice is. Because the best childcare people are older, much older, usually older females. In fact, in my experience, exclusively older females. When I lived in Los Angeles and was having children, I seemed to have a lot of children all in one go in a short amount of time. I had a beautiful nanny that helped me out. She was Mexican. Her name was Ophelia, and she came from my neighbor's children to my children when they didn't need her anymore. And she taught my children, she potty trained my children. She was in her late 50s. She had her own grown-up children. And, you've just got this wealth of experience in childcare, but also as a mother. And you could see that this woman knew things I didn't know, right? And I wasn't a particularly young mum. And I just don't know where all these people have gone. It's almost like they've been driven out by this young crowd of people. I don't know if it's an energy thing, if they're making them work longer hours. It's probably all financial and commercial. I would say that they're a lot cheaper to employ. And are probably a lot more flexible and stuff like that. And so usually these childcare places are about, making money, and we need to make sure that they're about the care. These places need to be held responsible. We're all talking about this young guy, and of course he's responsible and he must be charged. And I mean, my God, it looks like it's quite extensive. But the people who are supposed to do checks on him, they also need to face charges. That is negligence. That is, it could be criminal negligence, to be quite honest. If they were not monitoring, it's not just about background checks and psychological checks. They were obviously asleep at the wheel when these young children were handed over to people they'd approved to work in their childcare facility. So, in America, they really go after people for this stuff, criminal negligence. I don't really hear about it so much in Australia, and we should.
This is going to be one of those pivotal moments in Australia whereby we will be able to watch in real time and perhaps catch out those that are going to stand behind other bureaucrats to then deflect blame, like you've just made that allegation there, that there are other people that should be held responsible for not picking up what happened here. So we're going to see this in real time. So it's an opportunity for some form of new transparency, because at the end of the day, we've argued if the whole point of a glass windows in the bathrooms is so that there is literally transparency. So if you're going to then cover that up for reasons of privacy of a 3-year-old going to the potty, doesn't quite make sense if we understand it from an innocent child's perspective. For example, we've all seen little ones at the beach running around without swimming cozies on, because that's what they did, innocent little kids at 1, 2 or 3 years of age, and they didn't want to wear swimmers. They would just swim, and that was just what kids did. So it's not the same. However, having said that, I remember being at kindy as a 3-year-old or 4-year-old and never wanting to be the kid running around without clothes on. I was shy, and that didn't suit me, but I was aware that I was shy. I just didn't like that. So I could
I was
certainly
a
say,
shocker. I couldn't wait to get naked. I was one of I was a shocker. And I still, if I'm really going for it and I'm sunbathing, which is rare now because, too much sun is no good, but no sun is no good as well. There's a private place where I live, a private deck. I won't sunbathe unless I'm butt naked. I don't want to get little white panties when I'm sunbathing, the marks. But another thing this does, right? Aside, this is a very emotional issue. We're both parents. Most people watching this are parents and grandparents. Aside from the emotional thing and the criminal thing and the responsibility thing and all of that stuff, this again exhibits to me, and I'm sorry to keep banging on about it, that artificial intelligence and the digital world is not what they say it's for, and it's a complete failure. Because I can tell you now, the fact that we're all digitally tracked and listened to, and there's keywords, and they go into our photographs. It's all about permissions. Give us permission. You want to post on X? I want permission. It said to me the other day, I want permission to go through all your photos and videos. And I thought, how about just the one I'm posting? How about not all of them, right? Permissions. And when you hit that, you're done. They've got access to everything. Now, AI somewhere knows what that young guy Brown has been sharing. It knows what he's been saying. It knows what he's been doing. Where's the programming for it to pick up on something's awry here with this guy's behavior? You could go into my phone and my laptop all you want. You wouldn't find anything like that. But I would hazard a guess there are hundreds, if not thousands of people in Australia for whom AI is listening to them and knows that they're engaged in some form of paedophilia or sharing images of children. So where is this AI police force? Where is this digital control network that is meant to keep us safe? No, it's not there to keep us safe. It's there to fine us and make money. It's there for revenue purposes, not to keep us safe, because if it was, it would have picked up on this, right? If you and I send pictures that are so inappropriate they're criminal, you would expect one of these systems to pick up on it.
Or the contrary is that it's not capable or it's not allowed to, and it seems like it's a permission thing than an incapability. But again, it opens that door for debate, and that's part of the situation here. So what would the general public on a 51% to 49% basis call for? Would they want, a mandatory alert in digital devices if criminal content was being shared? And what would be the definition of that at that point? Would it have to be an image, for example, or would it be a thought, or would it be a political perspective? So this sends us back into the whole Julie Inman Grant e-safety commissioner. And I also think that that's interesting because George Christensen said, how is it that she can ban YouTube Kids, but she doesn't look for age verification for porn sites? How do you have that?
Look, I do want to get onto her. I do want to get onto Julian Grant. But before we leave this subject, let me just give you an example. The whole social credit thing, right? In China, if you jaywalk, which I do all the time, I can't wait for these traffic lights. If there's no cars coming, I just go. If I'm running over to the post office, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Or you were seen drunk and disorderly on the streets. This is in China. If I'm drunk and disorderly, it's in my own home, so I wouldn't be affected by that either. But there's certain social things you do, or you speak out against Xi Jinping. You can't get on a train. You can't get on a plane. I sound like Justin Trudeau. Your life is halted, right? Your social credit score drops, right? Because why do they know about this stuff? They know about this stuff because of AI and the cameras. We have that. It's not like we don't have it, right? They know what's going on, right? And if you're going to be sanctioned because you jaywalked or were drunk and disorderly in public or criticized Xi Jinping, why are people so... I realize it's not a nice subject, but people are really loath to talk about penalties and justice with regard to people who harm children, whether they are paedophiles, governments, or big pharma.
Yeah. This is hard, isn't it? Because it's the invisible barriers, the invisible lines in the sand where there is a willingness and an unwillingness, and it's generally out of convenience, one way or another. And the other big story, of course, is the Diddy verdict that's come out today. But exactly. So after everything that's gone on and all the evidence that we heard, and so there is a million questions about what's happened. Maybe the best thing to do to just sort of just pause for a moment is I'll play a clip when they learnt that Diddy had been refused bail, which was a big deal because there was an inkling of support for the idea that he may be let out on time served after what we'd just seen, but that wasn't the case. I'll play this clip, we'll come back and we'll get stuck into that because then we're going to obviously talk about Julian and Grant a bit later in the show as well.
The judge has just denied bail for Sean Diddy Combs. Let's go live to CB Cotton outside the courthouse. And CB, earlier today on Newsroom, when this was all happening, there was that light moment where the judge said, I bet you don't want to go back to the MCD. And he said, put his hands together in prayer and shook his head no. But now, even despite that light moment, he's going to be denied bail?
Hey, Dana, that's right. And you mentioned that light moment in the courtroom earlier after the judge appeared to joke with Diddy about his fate in terms of whether he was going to go back to prison. A lot of us out here thought that the judge might side with defense attorneys and decide to grant their request for bail. Ultimately, we've just learned from the courtroom that the judge has denied Diddy's request for bail. Both sides submitted arguments to the judge before this bail hearing that got underway at 5 p.m. local time. Prosecutors argued that Diddy should remain behind bars until his sentencing, and their arguments primarily recapped what we heard from them in trial. They told the judge that Diddy is a flight risk due to his wealth and resources, and they said there was also a risk with Diddy of witness tampering. They said he has a pattern of manipulation and control, and they cited the severity of the charges that Diddy faced at the start of this criminal investigation. We know defense attorneys had a much different take on whether or not Diddy should be given bail. They cited the fact that the jury found him not guilty on the most serious charges in this case, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. And they told the judge that Diddy has no criminal record. They also said he has strong ties to the U.S. And they mentioned he has a 3-year-old child who needs him and an 8-year-old mother who he is the primary caregiver for. It's clear now that those arguments fell short with the judge this afternoon, who has decided not to grant Sean Diddy Combs bail. At this point,
he has an 8-year-old mother. That was quite the feat.
Perhaps an 80-year-old mother there. But yeah, so this is really an interesting story that's developing. And of course, you can have your rose-colored glasses on, or you can think that maybe it was thrown. Alex Jones is suggesting that Maureen Comey threw the trial.
I agree.
So Maureen Comey, of course, daughter of James Comey, was involved with many of the Epstein sort of cases here and there, was brought in on the Ghislaine Maxwell case that resulted in Maxwell getting that 20-year-odd sentence. But this is an interesting photograph that that someone has shared. It's actually a sketch from the courtroom of Diddy. Now, I'm just trying to bring it up for you now. Immediately after the verdicts were read out, here he is, what some are saying that he was kneeling on the floor praying. So he gets the inkling that he's got off now serving the rest of his life in prison. These are the 2 minor charges of transportation, which still carry a 10-year sentence. But he's not going to get 10 years. He's not going to get close to that. But the defense are talking about a 20-month to a 24-month sentence. The prosecution are looking at 50 to 60 months, as much as 5 years. So is he going to get a 3-year sentence? Are they going to put a non-parole period? And are they going to say suspended whatever as time served and let him off? However, the sentencing hearing's now not until October. So that's still 3 or 4 more months that Diddy's got to sit there and think about what's happened. So it's still a significant punishment based on the said convictions. So there's been a few sort of speculations out there from people that are sort of watching on, and I think they're quite interesting. One is a very basic one, was 50 Cent, or 50 Cent as he's known. He came out and called Diddy the gay John Gotti. which is a pretty significant sort of name to call him, right? Because he has been outed for some of his sexual behaviours and, there's some homosexual activity out there. So there's no love lost between those guys. Now, a New York trial attorney, Nicole Brunecki, claimed the prosecution's case fell apart because it was built more on sensationalism than a solid legal basis. RICO charges require proof of an ongoing criminal enterprise with coordinated activity by multiple actors, not just deviant parties and disgruntled ex-girlfriends. So that's also a fair claim to make, whether or not we're weighing it up. Now, lawyer John Day said Combs' trial was a huge win for the music mogul's defence team. It means the jury did not buy the stories of Cassie and Jane and most likely believed they were enjoying life with Diddy voluntarily and all the trappings of that world. So there's another point there, and they're saying that that moment, that text message from Cassie Ventura, when she said always up for it or always ready, was an indication, therefore, that she was not doing it, not involuntarily, so that it was very hard to get a conviction. Now, others that are watching on are wondering this, and I think this is a little bit of value here to sort of put a little bit of balance. Earlier today, when Diddy was only convicted on the 2 lesser counts, he was obviously very excited. According to reports, this person wrote, he fell to the ground and began to pray. Then he found out that there would be a bail hearing at 5 p.m, and I'm almost 100% certain that he thought he was going to walk out the door today. Well, pretty much we all did. Now, we just found out that bail was denied. So the current mindset for Diddy right now is one of hopelessness and anger. He was thinking all afternoon about what he was going to do as soon as he walked out the doors today. He was certainly going to do that. Now I'm hearing that more charges may be brought to the table. If that's the case, then now they have him in a psychological chokehold. I think we should seriously consider the following question: when does a bird sing? So that is another fresh perspective on what is going on. So the Diddy case is certainly not over yet. I do wonder how he's going to manage because he would be losing his mind. He's done everything right. He's behaved himself like they told him to do. He sat through all of these technical smears and recalling what's going on. We all saw the evidence. And now he's in there until October, and it's only just July, July, August, September, like 90 more days. And we've seen his fits of rage. It's a very interesting time, and we'll have to see, of course, if there will be more people coming forward. But I'm not as confident as that because after could you imagine if he got out today, if you were Cassie Ventura, you would have to be pretty nervous that Diddy is out and knowing what we've heard, would he be looking for revenge? How would you get about that? How would you think about your personal security? So there's something weighing up here. But if someone comes forward from a new Department of Justice and not a Maureen Comey and says, hey, Diddy, we've got this, and this on you, and you are now going to face another 5 years behind bars while we muck around with another trial, and it's pretty heavy going, is he going to give something up at this point? Because that would be a turning point where other people's names are being finally dropped into it, because we've seen very little of people dropping names to save themselves to this point, but maybe we're in a new uncharted territory from now.
I look at it from different perspectives, knowing how dark the commercial world of music and Hollywood is. So for a long time, this is a guy, like most rappers, who played at, imaged at, let's pretend, at being a gangster for a long time. Then became so wealthy that he actually could behave like a real gangster, like he was in a TV show, right? And these people live a detached life. They become detached from reality because their reality is so different when you can buy anyone and do anything. You know, I wrote a book, The Witches of Turak, about all the rich men I know in Melbourne who, marry women, and they know the women are marrying them for money and they don't care. All right. They don't care that the women are after their money. They just want these young blondes. Now, the judge there, some of what was said seemed to suggest the same thing, that, you know, they were there living a lifestyle and having a nice time. And therefore, you know, essentially you get treated like a slave. And I think that was one of the references Diddy said about one of his underground basements that had chains and whips and ropes and all that kind of stuff. Here's what I think is probably likely going to happen. You're right. I think the fact that James Comey's daughter was involved in this has derailed it somehow, and that would have been engineered. And it had to be because after Ghislaine Maxwell, this cannot appear to snowball. This cannot appear to be the beginning of an avalanche of exposing all of their crimes and all of their evil, because you're right. The information he could give, the people he knows about, has likely protected him up to a point. But if someone else comes in and lays charges and he's looking at years and years, we could be looking at an Epstein scenario, real or fabricated, because he's not going to be allowed, whether from jail or because he's been released on the outside, to ever reveal the secrets that he knows. And he knows secrets on massive Hollywood stars. Some of them he used to date, right? And they're like a protected species, right? So he's never going to be allowed to do that. Now, the music industry and Hollywood is extremely ruthless. So there's also an element of played gangster to be a rapper, became kind of gangster because he was fabulously wealthy. And now once he's served time and comes back out on the outside, the monetization of the new Diddy musically, having gone to jail, having faced these charges, doing rap songs about, the biatch tried to take me down and I survived, and, going to jail and all those songs, that's going to be monetized. Everything's monetized, right? And so he will either be allowed to get through this because of the monetization, or someone different will go in. Now Trump's in the administration and things could look a lot different for him. And then we might be looking at an Epstein scenario if things, if shit really got real. But for celebrities, shit rarely gets real. And that's what's disappointing.
Yeah, and we've all been watching on for years now to realise that the what you've said fits the pattern of what we have seen. So we are waiting and have been with bated breath for a change, and it's painfully slow. And at this point, I just remind myself to continually at least think towards or look for the highest hope in this. If what we saw in the childcare story leads to some at least mainstream awareness, that's the term. And if the Diddy story is forcing the same story, then at long last we have to confront this. But I'm reminded of what I said earlier in the show, that people look to people in authority and they want to trust. And unfortunately, it's only until trust has been breached that you start to look at things differently. So the Jason Clare education minister point, where he comes out and says that he's been personally affected, or at least a close personal friend or family has been personally affected, that means that he has now crossed where he now seen the breach of trust that he's been in the business of covering up for his entire political career, more or less to become a Labor minister. Or if it were to be a Liberal minister, it would be the same thing. So it's this breaches of trust that unfortunately we all pray, play, work towards never having it. That's what this whole system is about. All of it is about no breach of trust, and yet it is there. It is.
But it raises difficult questions in Australia, Jason, right?
Yes.
Is a childcare worker allowed to be a pedophile?
Of course, no one's allowed to.
What would people say? No.
Of course they would say no.
Okay. So is a politician and a prime minister allowed to be a pedophile?
But they would say, of course not. And that's the great cover-up.
So why is it hidden? Why do we have a redacted list of Australian bureaucrats and one prime minister who was part of a paedophile ring?
Correct.
So,
and that's the point, because they haven't had that trust breached in their own sense. This is the Jason Clare thing that I'm trying to explain. That's why I think it is significant. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that this is the way that it should go, and it shouldn't. It should be that this information gets out there. The same in Australia, the same as we've seen in the UK. We've heard all these horrific stories, and we've known of sitting MPs, now not sitting MPs, talking about this openly. But it doesn't permeate the mainstream, the Andrew Bridgen stories, but this one has, and that's why it's so important. And I think here that we are amply qualified on this show because we're personally affected, for one, but also we've done the groundwork for many years. We've talked about it when it was unfashionable. We've been censored for it. I've been warned, not warned off, but warned about how it works when I interviewed Lionel Nation. And he said to me, even though his wife, Lynn's Warriors, a TNT radio host as well, and she was involved, and he says, I'm not telling you that you can't say it. I'm just telling you what happens when you do, how the system works. And he said it to me off camera, and I openly just talked about that because it's so important. I just want people to understand that we are certainly trying, but we have to approach it from so many different ways, because at the end of the day, it's not until it's 51% of the people demanding it that the rules will change. It's just the way that it is, and this is one of those moments. So yes, it is a sad moment, and yes, you can't waste a crisis Rama manual, but this is one that we have to make positive change from a very negative situation. But it's not just limited to this. It will become a business model for how we have to change things. And this is the power of what we have got to do here, as all daily Australians do. Nicola, at that moment, just because we're way into the show, I just wanted to address a situation that we had with people that are wanting to subscribe to the group, the group plan. So last month we had the wonderful special that we dropped our annual rate from $75 to $60 for an annual plan. Now, given that that is a finite June 30 special, technically, according to Australian consumer law, you can't keep running that special as much as we would like to do if we announced it as a special. If we chose to drop it to $60 permanently, that would be fine. But we haven't chosen to do that. It was just a great deal. But what we did for this month is we offered two different specials for July to kick us off. One was the foundation member plan, and that's a pretty exclusive club. That's people willing to put up a significantly more amount of money to support the Daily Australian. And we had another person join yesterday, Lynn, which was a wonderful. I'm very, very grateful for you doing that as well. So we now have 2 numbered foundation members supporters, and anyone is welcome to do that. So thank you so much for doing that, along with Malcolm the day before. But the other special that we offered was the group special. So what I wanted to do was to explain it, and I didn't realize this myself, but you actually need a link to be able to do it. Now, I've just put it up there on the screen. I don't expect people to be able to link on their screen and touch it, but you can see where it is at the end there. The dailyaustralian.substack.com/F64AA8F2. It's ridiculous, but I will post that, as will Nicola, under the show, so you can link that if you wanted to become and take advantage. So it means that 2 people, when joining as a group, get access to the $60 pricing. So you pay $120. 2 people effectively get the advantage of saving a combined $30 there, if you would like to do that to support independent media and the Daily Australian. So that's basically how you would do it off that link, and that will take you straight through to that page.
And I got confused yesterday. I do apologize for all the people that messaged me on various platforms, and they kept saying to me, Jason, where's the link to the special? And I thought they were talking about our chat with Billboard Chris. So yes. I kept responding to them going, it's in the show. It's around 41 minutes. And they were like, no, the link for the special. And I'm like, these people have gone insane. They were talking about the 2 offer, right? So we will put the link underneath. Finally, I understand what you're saying to me. Thank you so much. And take advantage of that. We're probably we're gonna mix it up. We're gonna change it up. We'll do different offers on different months. Jason comes up with those, very well planned. So it should be easy for you to link up. So if you want to get a subscription for yourself and then buy one for a friend or a parent or a relative as a gift, that's quite a nice thing to do.
Yeah, certainly really, really appreciate it. And it's part of, it's more than just supporting a show, isn't it? You are the Daily Australians. You're welcome to email us the story ideas. If you wanted to make a contribution, video or audio, you're welcome to do that at thedailyaustralian@gmail.com. We certainly encourage it. Now, I do want to make reference yesterday. It was a bit of a coup, if you will, to get Billboard Chris straight onto the show after his successful result. And I think it was a terrific interview that we had with him, and we went through all that process of what went wrong. But it's been received very, very well around the country. And I will make this point that Billboard Chris was recently on Rebel News, I think, with Avi Yemeni, and as a result of that interview that went out yesterday, Avi's decided to follow my account on X. So there you go. We're all cross-pollinating, if you will. He must have seen value in what he saw there, and so that would be wonderful if all the independent media started to work together in different ways and bring different skills to the table. But we don't stop there. That we will reach out continually for guests to come on to the show, and we're still fine-tuning the best way to do it, whether it would be a short interview, whether it be 15 minutes was really good. We got a lot of ground covered there, and certainly on different topics. And that's another thing. If you have got something that you want to get out on the Daily Australian, whether it be a new idea, a new concept or something like that, also reach out to us at thedailyaustralian@gmail.com. Or, of course, if you're following us already on X, etc., you can probably just send a message and we'll be able to do that. So we've got someone booked, I think, for Monday. We're working on that one as well, and continually to add other people into the show. We want to make it as broad as possible.
It's interesting you say he got followed by Avi, because I recently unfollowed him, but for very different reasons.
There you go.
Sorry about that, Avi. You keep following Jason.
There it is. Well, there's been a few interesting people that come along and follow, and I don't know what it is that attracts them, but some American accounts, some very large ones. So that's always nice to do. But it allows you, when people are following you, that you can communicate via direct message, which is the purpose of this.
Yeah.
And do they? So and look, some people are able to respond and others don't. So but purely by chance. It's how we, you have to meet people sometimes by chance, sometimes you're able to do it. And some people you think that you're easily going to line up an interview with, and you can never reach them. So
listen, last week when I interviewed Mark Atwood, I got contacted privately by Dr. Chris Shoemaker to say, I really like your interview with him. And I was like, whoa, can I interview you?
Wonderful. Chris is brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah. And you did. And it was a terrific interview. And that's the point, isn't it? That, success breeds success, if you will. That is where I'm going with that. And we should never stop thinking about ways to improve our own lives and the lives of each other. So this is part of the Daily Australian. Now,
well, actually, I wanted to just ask the viewers as well, the listeners. When we had Billboard Chris on yesterday, one of the things he was talking about that he'd experienced thanks to Karen, I hope we're going to speak about her today, and George Christensen and what he posted, is that he was talking about geo-blocking, right? And this habit of geo-blocking. And there's this notion now that the Australian E-Safety Commissioner is actually trying to circumvent the American First Amendment of speech by using Australian made up laws that none of us agree with. She's not got a mandate from Australians, so I don't know who she's getting a mandate from. And I was very concerned suddenly that we might be tampered with geo-blocking. So my question, I'll get to it. If you're watching this or even seeing bits of it in America in particular, the UK, Canada or New Zealand, and you can see us, just give us a thumbs up. Please just give us a thumbs up or a like, because now I'm concerned about geo-blocking that we can't see, that we don't know about, because this is what they do to people. Because now I think about it, there are a lot of quite loud, quite prominent voices in the UK that I never see on my X account. Never, ever see. And so now I'm thinking they've been geo-blocked in Australia. So again, it's a constant fight. So let us know if you can see us. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Maybe if you leave a thumbs up in the comments and what country you're coming from would be a really cool way of working out where the audience is. And I know we are getting subscribers, paid subscribers from internationally as well. So we definitely know that you're seeing us. Maybe you're not seeing us on X. Maybe you're able to find us on Substack, and there's various different ways. And that's the wonderful thing about Substack too, is that you're able to recommend other people's Substacks, and that builds up another way of being able to find each other. So it's interesting because it does tell us where people have come from, how they've discovered. So it is a continual process. Well, let's get on to Julie Inman Grant. It's been a very interesting show today. It's been a lot more, sort of discussion, sort of news, and I think that's lucky that it is a Thursday. We've covered a lot of ground this week. But on the Julie Inman Grant story, it continues, and George Christensen put together a very interesting thread, as he does. On his pages, and they're always very, very interesting to read, and they're simple to understand. I'm just going to probably put this a little bit out of order here, but this is one of the pages that George put. In fact, it's page 14 of 20, where he said that the American Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, just named Julie Inman Grant in a report called Exporting Censorship. They exposed her emails calling Republican wins soul-destroying. So much for neutrality. That's clearly partisan. And he specifically refers to this particular email here. where he says that the report also showed Inman Grant openly coordinated with left-wing activists to shape government policy. In one email, she wrote she would be grateful if GARM shared information so she could take it into account in her regulatory decisions. This is quite shocking when you realise how that she's working with this. So it's kind of like there's an agenda as opposed to working with problems. Exactly. And that's the point. So if there's an agenda involved, then it is a plan, it is a system, and it is certainly corrupt at that point. So it expanded, and there were other people that got involved with the conversation. And so we saw here how internet censorship first begun. This is a story from 2022. Facebook whistleblower, former defense and intel officials have formed a group to fix social media, for goodness sake. Now, when you see who these people are, some of the well-known names, former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, Leon Panetta, who was the head of the CIA, former Senator Claire McCaskill, an employee whistleblower Francis Horgan, former design ethicist Tristan Harris, and there's some others there involved as well, people who've led the Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, Internet Security Agency, the NSA, and the CIA. So how is it that you can have Leon Panetta, head of the CIA, involved in censoring the internet and calling it safety? That, for mine, is a little bit too far.
Well, what does that suggest? What does it suggest as an overview, everything that's going on right now? I think Julie Inman Grant is a CIA plant in Australia. I think all of it is being engineered. Australians are the very last people that are being considered. So she's called the Australian E-Safety Commissioner because it doesn't really alert the rest of the world, particularly America and her First Amendment, to the fact that this American, which has always felt weird, is in Australia doing this stuff. But now we learned from Billboard Chris yesterday that she's having very real effects on freedom of speech and postings in Canada, in America, right? It's not just Australia. And so it all starts to make sense why I said yesterday when I posted the show, American-born Australian e-safety commissioner loses in court to a Canadian dad, right? If that isn't a one world outlook on things, how on earth can she affect the life of a father in Canada and what he's doing? And the fact that we have to take to legalities, that he had to go to court to fix that, is absolutely disgusting. So I'm starting to think, and I don't think she's the only one either. I read out yesterday as well, I do apologize if you can hear barking. My dogs are fighting over bones. I said yesterday as well that one of the former Australian prime ministers was believed to have been removed by the CIA in Australia. I think it was Gough Whitlam. So I think you talk about the 51st state. I think there is a closer link with Australia and the USA, and has been for a long time, than we know about.
Well, there obviously has been. There's certainly more to it. And then we're reminded about the disappearance of Prime Minister Harold Holt, who was never discovered, who seemingly drowned at a Victorian beach. That's something else as well, like what happened in that circumstance. So there was some very strange stuff happening in the 60s and 70s. And it gives rise to why people become part of the sovereign citizens movement and want more information going on there. It also gives rise to the fact that whether or not we are going to use the system against the system one way or another, but it continues. Having said that, I want to just put up a couple more slides from George's thread that he put together here. So he's saying here that this is the Australian blueprint for censorship. Stretch the law, bend the definitions, collude with leftist non-government organisations, threaten social media platforms, delete dissent, and call it safety. Nicola, I reckon that George has nailed it on those 6 points there. What do you think?
Yes, I think so. And the question is, why are we lying down and taking it? Right? We didn't give anyone a mandate to do this to us. This wasn't part of anyone's policies. This hasn't even been discussed with the Australian public. Okay, this is not stuff that we want. Australia has gone nuts right now. We've got a state premier in Victoria, Jacinta Allen, who was elected by no one, who was likely taking her orders from Dan Andrews, who was the most totalitarian communist state premier we've ever had. We've got Julie Inman Grant, an American-born, living in Australia, affecting people's lives in other countries from Australia. We've got these NGOs. We've got Bill Gates meeting with our Prime Minister. The minutes of those meetings we're not allowed to have. We're signing up to World Health Organization treaties without understanding, because it hasn't been completed yet, what's required of us. This country feels very, very unstable politically and completely off the rails morally. Right? So much so that people are talking about removing themselves from society, becoming sovereign citizens, all of that stuff, right? They've really set the cat amongst the pigeons in Australia. I know a large group of people are waking up. It's believed to be 20 to 30%. I'd like it to be higher than that. But we've got to do more than just bitch about it on social media. Yeah. Some of these are extremely detailed posts. All the information is there. If this was a court case and we were in a courtroom, or if this was a royal commission into everything these people are doing, all of this stuff would be valid evidence and it's all true. But they shadow ban it, they censor it, they change legislation so no one can hear of it. I mean, it's extraordinary to me. These people are committing so many crimes, and they've essentially passed legislation that we can't talk about their crimes because that'd be hate speech.
Yeah, it's extraordinary again, isn't it? That's how we justify it. It's like a self-licking ice cream. There you go. Here's what George suggests is the action that you would start to take. The line must be drawn. 1, demand Julie Inman Grant be fired. Well, how do you do that? You're going to have to write to the government and to your local MP. Shut down the e-safety office. Well, that, easier said than done, but at least there's an approach of what you want to demand. Repeal the Online Safety Act. Now, and then he says, follow George, read the full story at his website, nationfirst.com.au, and of course, repost the thread. So, support for George there. And I have to say, plenty of Substack subscribers do come from George recommending us. So we obviously return the favor there as well.
All right. So my question is, where are all your good guy senators to bring this to the floor to repeal the Online Safety Act? Where are all your good guy senators? Where's One Nation? Where's Ralph Babbitt? Right? This is why I said the other day I'm not super impressed. Why aren't these people, you apparently voted them in. Why aren't they pushing ahead now and saying this has to be repealed? This isn't working. Nobody asked for this. Where's the mandate from the people for this kind of thing? We can't do it. All we can do is bitch and moan online. We've got to put pressure on our elected officials to table this motion that the Online Safety Act in Australia get repealed. And it needs to happen now. Start writing letters today.
So my approach would be is that some of us who have had previous, relationships or associations with the sitting senators, so you're talking Malcolm Roberts, Pauline Hanson, and Ralph Babbitt are the last sort of 3 there of the third parties. But there's 2 new One Nation senators that can certainly receive a letter. And there's no reason you don't have to write the same letter. You don't have to write 5 different letters. You write one letter and you address it to all of them. We don't have Gerard Rennick. We don't have Russell Broadbent. We don't have Craig Kelly. But what we do have, and we do have access to now, is a willingness in the National Party. If they've gone against net zero and they want to get back into power and they don't like being in opposition, there's no reason why you can't write to Senator Matt Canavan. There's no reason why you can't write to Senator Alex Antic from the Liberals. And there's no reason why you can't write to Jacinta Price at the very least there. And these would be some people that would be interested. And I would also hazard a guess that it would be worth writing to Barnaby Joyce as well as someone else. It would be worth writing to Bob Catter. There would be another person you should be able to write to who should be interested in your concerns about the online safety and the e-safety commissioner and censorship. So there you go. There's 10 senators at least that we can start with in the first instance, and then we can work on where we're going to go in the lower house in different areas where you would think that there would be some sort of support there. But that gives you something to at least make mention that we are entirely disappointed by the use of the e-safety commission to become a tool of censorship, and that means that it is not fit for purpose. That is not what this is about. And so that there has been a breach there. And again, it is a breach of trust. trust. And that's the point. Until trust has been breached in an individual circumstance, you don't start reflecting and think, well, what else has been breached here? And yet it is a breach of trust that authority or power will use against you. If they consider that you've created a breach of trust, they will use that to dismiss you from a job or to disown you, whatever. So technically what shadow banning is, that authority goes to a tech platform on which you are based and says they have breached trust by spreading misinformation, which we now know is not a lie. There is only truth or lies. They can't call it a lie. They call it misinformation, which basically means it's anti-narrative, anti what they want you to believe. And they use that. And therefore, that is the breach of trust that they rely on, which isn't actually a breach of trust. It is a breach of non-compliance with a hive mind of a system that is literally looking to deceive you.
Well, we also know it's a very costly and expensive office. We know that because of her salary. And so, it's not effective. It's not wanted. I mean, we've got young people running around abusing 5-month-old babies, and there's nothing online that's preventing this guy from doing that. So, she seems to focus as well, like on people's social media posts, people's opinion, people debating and discussing. When did human beings discussing things become any of your damn business? Like any of your damn business. Do you know what your damn business is? Finding out who is doing chatter about terrorism, chatter about pedophilia, chatter about national security issues. How I feel about you, Julie Inman-Grant, is not a national security issue. How people feel about the COVID-19 vaccine is not a national security issue. Not unless you've got something really important you want to hide, right? This whole thing is looking totally suspicious. The people they're supposed to protect are not being protected. And the people they're supposed to guard against and prevent from, undertaking nefarious activities, no one's keeping an eye on them. Children can't watch YouTube, but this guy is likely sharing pornography. None of these departments are any good. We can see what you're doing. You're trying to circumvent the First Amendment in America and behave in an unconstitutional manner. You're behaving in an unconstitutional manner in Australia. Who's giving this woman her mandate? I say again, I believe Julie Inman-Grant is a CIA plant. And I know you watch this show, guys, over at the CIA. I used to have a huge, massive amount of respect for you. And I'd like to have a huge, massive amount of respect for you again. What you need to do is work out your plans and your plots a bit better, because this one's stinking up the room. We can see who she is. We can see what she is. And it's time for her to leave.
And I like it when Hoodie makes mention on his show about the Australian Signals Directorate wasting their time listening to. He apologises to them for having to listen to them prattle along. He says, and that's the point. So if the Signals Directorate finds it interesting to watch the Daily Australian, perhaps you guys can send in a few subscribers as well. No, that was a joke. We don't need you to subscribe, but that is the point.
Australian.
But seriously, I mean, you are on the wrong side of history. That is for sure. Now, also speaking of what's on the wrong side of history, maybe this will be the last story of the day, but it's a good one. Look at this that popped up on Blaze. The FDA has slapped damning warnings on COVID-19 vaccines. Yep, highlighting Biden administration's safety risk gloss. The FDA compelled Pfizer and Moderna to update their myocarditis warnings, Nicola. This is certainly a big deal and one that we haven't seen in a while. And there was a clip that went along from Vinay Prasad, and I've cut the first couple of minutes out of it. I think it's worth having a look at for the details. He then goes into a history lesson of the stuff that we already know about going back to February of 21 when these were first reported in Israel. And the reason it was so comprehensive over there was that they had a one vaccine policy. They were exclusive to Pfizer. So when things popped up, it was obvious at the point, but I can't understand why they would have done that. But it's turned out to produce the benefit of knowledge. Of course, it's knowledge, official knowledge, recognized official knowledge that forces change. So let's play this video now. We'll make it the last one for the show, and we'll come back and have a brief discussion and have a look.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be discussing the safety label update for myocarditis associated with mRNA COVID vaccines, which we just put forward. This came out on June 25th, 2025. The FDA approved a required updated warning, which is a class warning for all mRNA COVID-19 vaccines in conjunction with the manufacturers. I'm going to walk you through the updated warning and the basis for the warning. First of all, I'd like to thank David Kaslow and the vaccine team and Richard Forshee and the pharmacovigilance team for writing, coordinating, and deploying this safety label change. Also like to note this SLC was initiated prior to my joining the agency. And note, I'm not using the FDA branch abbreviations in the hopes that this presentation will be more accessible to the general public. The updated safety label. The updated safety label for the mRNA COVID vaccines harmonizes the age range across products and adds additional data about the adverse event of myocarditis and what we know. It's based on two factors. It's based first on the unadjusted crude incident rate from the 2023 to 2024 formulation, and it's also based on persistent and concerning cardiac MR findings. So this is a slide that we put together. This is the FDA analysis of the BEST system, which is an observational data system that captures myocarditis and pericarditis following immediately afterwards, the first 7 days, COVID-19 mRNA vaccination. And what you see here is that even in 2023, 2024, the last year for which we have data, you see a rate of myo and pericarditis of 8 out of 1 million in all persons in this age range. And in the highest risk demographic group, young men between the ages of 12 and 24, it's about 27 per million. Notably, the BEST data set does not allow us to disambiguate the risk by product, and as such, this is a class mRNA safety label. The second piece of evidence that is captured in the new safety label update is some concerning findings we've noted with late gadolinium enhancement. Now, late gadolinium enhancement is a radiographic abnormality seen on cardiac resonance imaging, and this is how it's been described prior to in the literature in the context of myocarditis. Patchy myocardial and focal subepicardial enhancement as an expression of potentially irreversible injury is how it's been described. The FDA notably funded a study led by Jane and colleagues in 2024, which showed among hospitalized patients with COVID-19 induced myocarditis, a high proportion, the majority, had initial late gadolinium enhancement on cardiac MR. But most concerningly, at 5 months of follow-up, 60% of these patients continued to have LGE. And our results for late gadolinium enhancement are consistent with many, many others, as I'll show you here. This was a study from Australia that followed post 6 months for post-COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis. Over half of the patients were still reporting symptoms. 67% had abnormal follow-up cardiac MRs, and 35% showed what was listed as evidence of fibrosis. I did a quick systematic review pulling all available publications documenting late gadolinium enhancement, and these are some takeaway summaries. 92% is occurring in men, 90% have LGE at presentation, but most concerning, 72% have persistent LGE even months thereafter, very consistent with the FDA's sponsored study.
Gosh, that's a conspiracy theory he's reading out there, surely, Jason.
So that's how far we've come, and that is the point again. That is what inspires me to realize that it's so slow. It is beyond pedestrianly slow, but it's a process, and that's what we just have to be able to work with. I mean, what else can you do but to continue to try and try and try, so what if you don't have success every day? You just got to keep doing it. Well, look what just popped up. I'll show you this one. This is from Rick's World, replying to Billboard Chris, who shared our show yesterday. The Daily Australian is one of the best independent news shows in the world. Jason and Nicola do a great job day after day. Well, we must be doing something right. How about that? Thank you to Rick's World. What a wonderful thing, and thank you for taking the time to say it. It certainly means a lot to for what we're doing here, and we do strive to make this show better and better every day. And amongst all of that, get on with the business of living and doing all the other things, and paying the bills and feeding the kids like we're all doing at the same time, and to come up with concept, new information, and realizing that we are certainly permeating the mainstream, step by step, inch by inch, play by play. But this is all because we want to change the world and make the world a better place for all of us, and certainly leave it a better place than we found it for our kids and their kids.
And you guys are helping us do that. You guys are helping us with every message of encouragement and support that you send. And I'd just like to read out a very short Bible verse that one of our viewers sent me from Romans 12:19. Do not avenge yourselves, beloved, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Thank you very much for sending that. That cheered me up. You sent a whole bunch more as well, and it was fantastic. And I'd forgotten about them, and I shouldn't have. So I think it's marvelous, Jason, that we've become even, I think, better versions of ourselves than we were before all this. If I could change everything and go back and have it never happen, like a time travel movie, I would probably do that. But at the same time, I think the Great Awakening and the sort of half society finding the depths of their soul and half of society detaching from their soul, which is quite strange, I think has been a wonderful thing and something I'm very grateful for. And I'm grateful for all of you who've helped us and support us and engage with us and make sure that our voices get heard as far and wide as possible. So thank you so much for watching again The Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and Jason Olbourne, Mr. News himself. We will do this for the last time this week, tomorrow.